couple of ground rules. First of all, on my side, I'm not inflicting PowerPoint on you. That's a huge concession. They tempted me, I said, no way. I'm not using notes. And so I want to crave your indulgence, because a lot of what I have to say will annoy you or provoke you, and etc. But I presume you didn't come to have your prejudices confirmed, but to have them challenged. And thirdly, everything I say is subject to the three great provisos of by and large. In other words, there's no point in you coming up and standing up and whinging at me. But isn't it true that Jane Austen did this? I don't care. Don't footnote me. You can't maintain any public discourse without making broad statements, which are all liable to be wrong. So, what I want to do is to challenge the primacy of character-driven books and films and plays that now dominate our lives. Like, last year the Irish Times ran a course on writing. They interviewed about 20 writers, and to a man and a woman, they all said they started with a character and they let it kind of wander around the place, and they followed it and they saw where it led them. They all said that. Nobody said, no, I started with a very hard plot and I stuck to it and I finished. And The Guardian did the same thing 2 years ago. The Guardian ran a series on how to write for television. And there was stuff on character, on arcs of development, on background, and nothing on plot. In National Film School, I am the only person who talks or writes or teaches about plot. And also, I used to teach internationally about plot, and I was also the only person who was in any of these international schools that talked about plot. Same manner, I was in UCD teaching on a creative writing course, and it was clear they didn't want me there. I mean, they made sure to ease me out after a while, and one of the reasons was I was talking about plot. And the kind of trendies that run these creative writing schools, they don't understand the writer's passion and need for plot. Because every time I keep getting these emails from all these students I met in UCD saying, please help me with this, please help me with this. Because the one thing that everyone is bad on at writing is plotting. It's not taught, it's not talked about. And as fiction goes on, this fashionable convention that I have a character, I let it wander around. The worst offender here is John Manville, of course, whom I adore and love, as we all do. But like, I love his Untouchables, and I love the Book of Evidence, and I can't stand the sea, and I can't stand all that Kirk stuff. And I don't know anybody who does really love that stuff, and how could they? The former head of the forensics lab in Dublin here took him apart on radio when he brought out the first Kirk series, because he just doesn't care about pathology and forensics, and that's fine. He wants to do fine writing, that's fine. But you have to respect the genre, as the guy from the forensics, the guy who the probe blew off his leg, he said, like, it's a genre and you've got to respect it. If you're going to do detective stuff, you've got to just do what Michael Connelly and Chandler and the others do and have some respect for it. Anyway, the point I'm making is that it is very fashionable to say that you don't plot. Stephen King says the same. He couldn't be telling the truth. Just they can't be telling the truth, because you can't have a structured novel like Carrie without having some element of plotting going on. But it's also misunderstood what's meant by plot. And what I mean by plot is, I mean necessity. Necessity, not freedom. And so I come back and ask myself, what is this fashion for saying, I'm only interested in characters, I have no interest in plot? This need among writers, and then ring me and talk to me and text me and email me, is they say, what do I get the character to do to fill 120 pages? You see, it's easy to talk about. Screenwriter tells me, you see, I teach National Film School, and someone comes up and tells me, I've got this woman and she lost her husband and she's never got on well with her mother, and that's my screenplay. And I said, well, the screenplay is 120 pages long. When you've done that for one page, what are you doing for the other 119 pages? What's going to happen? And they don't like me asking these questions. So I want to kind of try and get it. And I know you're the kind of people who love to know things. And so basically I'm conducting a creative writing class with you now. That's what I'm going to do. The consensus on character is that if you ask any amateur about what's a novel, they think a novel is about going somehow inside a character and revealing some interiority about the character. That's a lot of the novel, like The Sea is like that. A lot of Virginia Woolf style novels are going inside characters and meditating on stuff. I call it fine writing, and it's a natural in journalism. It's appalling in journalism, fine writing. Fine writing is when Kevin Myers doesn't want to really hammer feminists or hammer the provost, and he wants to write about butterflies down the country. And he writes an incredibly intricate and a very interesting column about butterflies. What we all know is taking time out. Columnists who do fine writing is a terrible abuse in newspapers, and they're right. Fine writing is when you haven't got a plot, or a point of view, or something definite to say. You want to say about McCabe on the one hand, about Sergeant McCabe, the other hand, and the kind of noise of an editorial, like, we must all be concerned about the terrible crisis in our society, without actually coming clean about what you're doing. So where does all this stuff about interiority come from? Well, first of all, it's new. Novels weren't about interiors until Freud. I mean, Jane Austen got on fine without interiority. Is the truth universally acknowledged that a young man in possession of a fortune must be in want of a wife? There was the plot laid out in the first sentence. Young man, fortune, woman needed to marry, because, as Auden famously said about her, she knew more about money than Marx. Jane Austen. She knew more about. It's all about money and depression. And the whole world is conjured. And I believe that all great novels, as all works of art, declare themselves instantly in the first few minutes or seconds, or instantly look at it. You see it on the spot. You see Caravaggio, immediately you know it's good. You might spend the rest of your life pondering the taking of Christ, but you know immediately that you're there. It's not that you have to wander around in through the painting, that it doesn't hit you with an impact instantly. It does, like the Pieta does. Then you notice the leg, the foot, the Virgin. But first, the totality of it hits you, as in the plot. So where did all this come from, this interiority notion, the amateur notion that novel writing is about going inside people and coming out with the inside? Where did that come from? Well, it wasn't in Homer. Homer got he got through the Odyssey and through the Iliad with almost no interior life whatsoever. The interior life in Homer comes from the pressure of action upon his characters. There is actually nothing in Achilles until he's put under pressure. Now here's heresy that you won't believe. I don't believe, and I've written lots of screenplays and some that weren't bad. I don't believe there's anything in a character at all. I don't believe there's any such thing as a character. I think it's just nuck, I call it gudge, nothing. There's no such thing as Mary O'Sullivan until action pressurizes her into revealing what she is. So plot is primary. But it was primary for all great writers. Shakespeare says, the plot's the thing. He means it. The famous Christopher Ricks said, Christopher Ricks, who's the best critic in the world, not James Bloody Wood, another pretentious messer, but Ricks, who believed that Bob Dylan should get the Nobel Prize. Ricks says everyone talks about Shakespeare's metaphors and Shakespeare's poetry. What they should be talking about is Shakespeare's plots, he says. It's the intricacy of these plots that matter. Like, he stole the plots from Plutarch, a lot of them, but the way he works them. He says plot is primary in Shakespeare. And we'll see how true that is later. And he says it's the way the plot pressurizes the revelation of character that matters. Homer didn't need plot, or didn't worry about characters' interiority. Shakespeare doesn't worry about characters' interiority. It happens after the pressure is put on. We find out about Hamlet after his father asks him to avenge him. That's what we find out about him. And where does this come from? Well, it actually goes, where does this interiority thing in writing, this new thing, it comes from a kind of a revival of Plato. The revival of Plato in politics, in all that kind of leftyism, that soft, non-Marxist leftyism that comes out as identity politics and political correctness, rather than the hard Marxist analysis, with which I grew up, with which I was a communist for most of my life. And communism to us meant the exploitation of labour, and that was the primary thing that mattered. But now it's about identity. The whole world is about identity politics rather than about how. And that's what happened to the Democratic Party in America. They forgot that first rule of Marx. Not about identity politics. But Plato, you see, Plato and Marx divide the world between them. Everybody, Whitehead the philosopher said that all Western life was a footnote, Western philosophy was a footnote to Plato. Well, it's more accurate to say it's a footnote to Aristotle. But these two men, they divide the whole world between them, not just the West, but the entire world. Plato and Aristotle divide the world. In this room, I believe that it's deeper than genetics, politics, identity, race, or anything. I believe the difference between a Platonist and an Aristotelian is deeper than any racial or class division. I believe this room is full of Platonists and Aristotelians. And I think under pressure I could find out very quickly who's one. And Platonists will make Platonists will make a very certain kind of film, a very important kind of film, or write a very important kind of novel. They can write a novel about the sea. But Platonists are not good. They're not good at writing stuff like Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility. Aristotelians write a different kind of novel. It's a novel fundamentally of action and of exteriority rather than of interiority. And for some reason we privilege interiority, although Homer didn't and Shakespeare didn't. It's been privileged since Freud's time only. And V.S. Pritchett, the great novelist and critic, says that's been a huge loss in literature, he said, because when the novel became plotless, he said, it began to part company with society. So when you read Austen or George Eliot, you're reading about, about the Jews indirectly. You're in Middlemarch, you're getting pictures of the whole society as you get from Austen. And from Dickens, of course, you get these marvellous, like that analysis of the law in Bleak House. All great novels are like this. There's the horizontal, the vertical line. That's the line of society. And then there's that line of the individual interaction with it. And it's a cross. And where society and the individual connects, that's where great literature takes place. The modern novel has only this line, a lot of them, this line. And we're not that interested. It's lost contact with this world, that world there. And the place where that contact is least lost is in movies. In three kinds of movies, or geographical movie areas. The North Americans, the Koreans, Hong Kong, and the Japanese make what I call classical films where this interaction takes place, and where action is driven by, or where plot is driven by action, or the film is driven by action. Thus following Aristotle's great aphorism in the Poetics, which is is like a political book in my view. It's the opposite of Plato's world, because Aristotle says action is the sole morality. Again and again in the Poetics he reminds us that in the famous six-point list of what makes a great drama, it says plot, then character, then dialogue, then the theme of the story, then production, or basically spectacle he calls it, and melody. That's the list, Aristotle's list in the Poetics. And do you know that that's exactly the list that a Hollywood producer, the good ones, use when they're checking out a film script? They don't really say, like, let's start at the back and see if the production design is great in this screenplay. Or they don't say, let's see if the soundtrack is great, or even if the dialogue is any good, or even if the theme is that important. They want to know what the plot is like. And when Extravision was in business, one thing you could always do is go into the staff and say, what's renting? What's the top renter? And they would always know the answer. It was the Shawshank Redemption. It wasn't any kind of interior, what I call French movie. Now let's come to that, what I call French movies. A terrible abuse. And I don't mean by French movies made in France. Lost in Translation, what my wife calls Lost in Procrastination. Lost in Translation is a French movie made in North America. A French movie is a character-driven movie fundamentally posited on interiority. Where does all that come from? Where does this fashion come from? Because the bad politics of that kind of writing is connected with bad politics in politics, in my view. It goes back to Plato. Aristotle. Plato believed in essentialism. He believed fundamentally in essences. We had qualities inside us, fixed qualities. Aristotle's pupil, who rejected him, believed in existences. If you ask Plato what John Murphy was like, he would give you a list of his qualities. If you ask Aristotle what John Murphy is like, he'd say, borrow £1,000 from him to get your business back on the road, and don't tell anyone that I asked you for it, and don't ask me to pay it back. And then you know what John Murphy is like. If John Murphy doesn't tell anyone, and if he doesn't nag you for the money, then you know what John Murphy is. There is nothing there in John Murphy's Plato, except a list of qualities. But how do we know that these qualities will last under pressure? We don't know how people will behave, and that's why I'm slow to judge Germans during the 30s. We don't know what we will do. There is nothing in the character. I honestly believe this. There's no such thing as a character until action presses on that character. So we don't know what we will do when the Gestapo knock on the door. Are there Jews in this house? None of us can honestly say we know what we would reply to that question. No, we've had the moral, William says, not to be born at that time. Moral law. We don't know what we do. And if you doubt how boring we are until pressure is put on us, pressure of family, of standing the line, of being honest, of running a marriage, of running a life, of standing up like McCabe did, how do we know what's in any Garda out there? Like, what is in them? We only know what's in McCabe now. He's the only one we really know about, because he stood the line. And I repeat to you, I don't believe there's any such thing as a literary character. I believe there's an emptiness inside them until they're put under pressure. And this belief that the interiority is sufficient comes from Plato's notion of essences, that here's a list of qualities for you. And Aristotle says, look, I'll tell you what, a lawyer, you ask Plato what a lawyer is, and he'll give you a lecture on the abstract notion of what a lawyer does, of what law means. If you ask Aristotle what a lawyer is, he says, a lawyer, to know what a lawyer is, you will have to study somebody who's actually practicing law. There's a terribly big difference. It's not the Gareth Fitzgerald who give you an abstract lecture. If you ask Aristotle, what is a politician? He won't give you the Platonic lecture about the nature of the perfectibility of man. He will say, a politician is somebody who is practicing politics. And Aristotle doesn't even accept that you can talk about politics separate from the person practicing it. So that's why he says virtue is a habit. You ask Plato what is virtue, and Plato will give you a lecture on virtue. You ask Aristotle, what is virtue? And he'll say, you have to find the virtuous man and see what he's doing. It's a description. Descriptive with Aristotle, it's prescriptive with Plato. And Plato says, man is perfectible, man is an angel. And Aristotle says, no, he's not. He's flawed, he's fundamentally flawed. And from the whole notion of perfectibility in Plato comes the French Revolution and all the perfecting isms like communism, socialism, fascism, Islamism, all the perfectings of man, all come from Plato, and so does the rest of it. The political correctness, the sense of victimhood. All Platonic writers I know, they have victims in their stories. And especially women writers are prone to it. And the best women writers now curing themselves of it, and they're now dominating crime fiction because they're giving up the bad habit of having victims as their heroes. In Aristotle, Patricia Cornwell, in you write with Patricia Cornwell or Patricia Highsmith, the great lesbian writers, they say they're free of that by and large. The lesbianism is a wonderful freeing up of the Platonic drag. So if you read Highsmith, what you get in Highsmith is a woman or a person who's the agent of the plot. There are no victims. In the whole Platonic tradition, everybody's a victim of the plot. Afternoon television, oh mummy, isn't it awful, what's happening to me, what's happening to us and to this family, angst, angst, angst. And they're all victims, and women are indulged, their writers in that, and thanks be to God, women are rejecting it. You know, what you have to have is an agent of the plot. And if you're not an agent of the plot, you have a rotten book. And far too many novels are about women as victims. So, what is the fundamental difference between Plato and Aristotle, apart from this essence's interiority? From the notion of interior essences comes the passion for interiority in novels. Aristotle, on the other hand, is all about exteriority. He says there's no morality except action. He says action is the soul of morality. He says plot is the soul of tragedy. So, what is the practical consequence? The practical consequence is that when I read hundreds of scripts every year, and the amateurs are all, and the students that I have who are amateurs and who don't make good writers or directors, are all people who believe that what they need is freedom. They think if they got enough money from the government, or they go on the right location, the County Clare all the time, or preferably to Afghanistan, they'll come back with a great film. It's a passion to escape from the claustrophobia of having to write the novel which is in your head, always in your head. Locationism, it's a disease. It's a passion. Bad producers, directors all want to go on location or set their books in exotic places rather than just Kinnegad and make it really hard. They believe in freedom. And I tell my students that great plots are necessity. Plotting is nothing to do with what the butler saw at Happiscourt and did Sir Robert really, was he locked in his study and did a train pass at that time? It's not Agatha Christie. What is plot? What do I mean by plot? By plot I mean necessity. Plot is necessity. And I'm going to prove to you now that freedom is the enemy of any writer. Freedom is the mother of absolute anarchy and confusionism in writing. Necessity is the mother of art. Let's imagine a freedom situation. Let's imagine there's a beach, Inchydoney Strand or Inch Strand, stretching for miles. And there's 4 people on it, 2 guys, 2 girls in their 20s. Girls are wearing bikinis and they're messing around. The guys are lying down, they've had a few beers and they're kind of trying to put down the day. It's a day off for them. The 2 girls get up and they start playing tennis. Remember now the sands are stretchy on all sides. They're in a state of freedom, okay? Use it as a metaphor. They get up and they start to play around with the tennis ball. Can they hit the ball? I'm asking you a question rhetorically, we'll look for an answer. Can they afford to play tennis as they would on a tennis court? Can they do that?
No,
they can't do an overhand drive. They can't serve. Because why? The ball will run into the sea or they'll chase it, they'll go past the other person. So what they do is they adjust themselves to maybe do these underhand lob things we do for a while. So they're not playing real tennis. And the guys are bored. So when the guy gets up and he makes a little net out of the windbreakers and he marks out the place on the sand. So now he's taken that much freedom away from them. But they're more interested in the game, even though it's lobbed. It's got to get over the thing. So let's take away some more freedom. Let's go to the central court of Wimbledon, where there's no freedom at all. Millions are riding on the game. There's bumpers, ball girls, dense crowd, claustrophobic crowd in the arena, a limit to the game, rules. We can't take our eyes off it. And yet their freedoms have been taken away. And it's true. You're in a guard tower at Auschwitz camp in winter. You're looking down at 2,000 prisoners in a square. The snow is falling. There's nobody moving. In the middle of the square you see there's a raggedy tennis net. There's 2 emaciated looking girls looking at each other. Camp Comden walks out. He looks at them. You were the champion of Berlin and you were the champion of Munich. You never played each other. We never know who was the best. This morning we're going to find out. And whoever loses is going to go there. And he points at the chimneys. I defy you to take your eyes off that match. Very different to 2 of them having a chat about life. That's not enough to make a great film. To make a great film, you have to open in Berlin in 1929 maybe, when the 2 girls, happy and rich, are happy and they're playing and they discover that they're lesbians and they love each other. And they part company and they become two great tennis champions, but they were lovers for a while. And now we're in Auschwitz. And now they must play a tennis match against each other and they both love each other. So both of them are trying to lose this tennis match. But he knows that, the commandant does. So he puts more pressure. If you do this again, you could have returned that, sir, you didn't do it. Next time you do that, she dies. Next time you do that, she dies. I defy you to take your eye off this film. This is what happens when you take away freedoms. You begin to get art. And all amateurs postpone that plot moment until the end or the middle of their books. I used to do the screenplays myself until I learned any better. All professionals try to get it up to the top, as close to the top as possible. It is a truth university acknowledged, that a young man in possession of force must be wanted in life. Or Ford Maddux Ford, this is the saddest story ever told. Or Dickens, fog on the Thames, fog rolling, fog. Remember the opening of Bleak House? No. Hamlet, above all Hamlet. How well Shakespeare knew it. in Romeo and Juliet and in Macbeth, you find what I call, copyright by the way, the necessity clause. It has to be in every great written work of art, if it's to hold an audience. Oh yes, you can indulge yourself. If you're working for a socialist government, you can make any rubbish you like and go on wander forever. If you're in the French subsidised state film industry, you can make bad pictures. When I worked in RTE, if I worked my backside off, my program went out at 7 o'clock, and lazy producer could have one go at 8 o'clock and didn't matter, still got paid the same money. That's the downside. I have to tell you, as a former communist, but still on the left, I have to tell you that the Americans make the worst films in the world, but they also make the best. Brokeback Mountain was made by two guys raising money to make a film about homosexuals. It went out in the market, they could have lost every penny. The French never made a film as good as Brokeback Mountain about gays. They couldn't do it. Subsidy doesn't do it. It's too easy a life. You don't get great art out of RT, you won't. You have to leave RT to get great art, to follow something that you want to do passionately to get it right. Now, Macbeth. Shakespeare was a natural screenwriter. I mean, you don't have to look at Polanski's Macbeth. You know, look at the opening scene. 3 witches, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Macbeth should be king of Scotland. Repeated immediately on the battlefield. That was a bloody great battle, Macbeth. You should be king of Scotland. Back home to his wife. You should be king. My husband should be king of Scotland. It's faster than Breaking Bad. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. 3 scenes of necessity, you should be king of Scotland. The plot laid out in front of you, no wandering around, no descriptions of nature, none of that kind of John Van the Sea, like where